Should ARCA stop running at Daytona? Denny Hamlin thinks so.
3, 2, 1.
What's up, everyone? Hope everybody out there is off to a great week so far. I got something interesting here to talk about today. Something I found very interesting anyways. I was doing some reading today, and I come across some interesting points, observations that Denny Hamlin made around the ARCA series, particularly at Daytona this year. So we're going to talk about this here in this episode, and of course, I always want your comments and your opinions on this. But apparently, during the race, Denny went to Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it now, and said, "I wonder if the casuals at home watching right now on Fox are thinking that this is NASCAR. Yikes!" So obviously, Denny was worried that somebody who's new to the sport would think this was the NASCAR series and not think too much of it. And I do got to say for myself, this past weekend, that when we were an hour and 15 minutes in the race and only had 8 green flag laps, I think 29 laps complete, it was kind of annoying to me in so many ways. But we're going to get more to that right there. But I want to further follow up here with what Denny said. Apparently he said this on his Actions Detrimental podcast. He said, "Don't get me started on ARCA race. Can we get those guys off that track? I'm sorry, but inexperienced drivers should not be running 190 miles per hour at Daytona." And he went on to say, "It's unsafe for all. It's just that it does not belong at that track." And he says, "This is a lower series that needs to be running on short tracks." The interesting part for me right here is, first of all, we know Denny is very vocal about his thoughts and puts his stuff out there, and obviously has the podcast to say what he needs to say. But the interesting part for me with this is, yes, there have been a lot of incidents in ARCA series. There's been some fatalities. We're going to get to that here in a moment. But this is also a proving ground for upcoming drivers. And when you go back through history and look, there is a ton of Cup drivers who come through the ARCA series. They got their experience out there in the ARCA race to move up through. I mean, you got to look back, just look at Kyle Petty, for instance. He's one of the first names I can think about, Allison, stuff like that. But then you got to look at the people who really prevailed in the ARCA series. You got champions like Frank Kimmel, and you got the Venerinis out there, who the Venerinis have done so much for so many drivers coming up through the ranks into the Cup series. Joey Logano is one that it comes to mind, first of all, just to think about Joey getting out there in the 25 car prior to getting with Joe Gibbs Racing. So this was, which I don't think he ran Daytona in that car at all, but still, they were out there on bigger tracks in these cars. So it's been a proven ground for a lot throughout the years. Now, I want to get to some other interesting parts about this, because there's been a couple incidents, a couple tragedies, fatalities in the ARCA series that have implemented safety measures for NASCAR that are really, really interesting. So we're going to talk about, let's start out with Denny's case at Daytona. Let's talk about Daytona, February 7th, 1985, the Daytona ARCA 200. Francis Affleck, a 34-year-old Canadian driver, he was in a very serious wreck in practice in which his window net failed and he partially came out of the car. I don't like to show things like this, but it kind of gives a better idea of what happened. And he was pinned under the car. And following this, NASCAR, ARCA, everybody really got some safety implementations on the window nets. So it furthered safety aspects after that right there. I'm gonna do one more here with Daytona, and that was Slick Johnson. This is another guy who, I mean, a lot of experience in racing, and this was in 1990 at Daytona. Was in a very bad pileup, suffered a skull fracture, passed away unfortunately a couple days later. But this is a guy who had a lot of experience, who got caught up in these situations there. But again, I want to go over to, it's not only Daytona, and this is another advancement in technology that happened, unfortunately, and this was at Charlotte. Which Denny went on to say, if they want to run intermediate tracks, fine, let them do that. But I'm going to show the case right here that even on intermediate tracks, it's not always safe. October 4th of 2001, Blaze Alexander, a very talented driver, up-and-coming driver, got into an incident with Kerry Earnhardt, unfortunately, almost a head-on impact into the wall, and suffered a skull fracture. Unfortunately, passed away from that incident. And the thing that was interesting is this was the 4th death in 17 months in NASCAR. So following that, they implemented the NASCAR mandated the Hans or the Hutchins device for safety aspects. And I'm going to, as long as we're on Charlotte, Eric Martin, uh, October 9th, 2002. So, I mean, 1 year after Blaze's passing in a practice crash, got hit by Deborah Renshaw. And this was a very tragic incident right here. He suffered massive internal injuries, but this was because there was no spotters up on top of the track during practice. They only had to be up on top of the transporter. I believe Bob Shack was actually spotting for him then. I think he was in Bob's car. Um, but you're going to see that a lot of these things that have happened with this, with fatalities, they're things that have been changed in so many ways. But also, we got to go to Atlanta. Now, we'll take a look at Atlanta because this goes back in history. And this was back to June 2nd, 1985. This was Georgia ARCA 500. Stuart Linden. This was a driver from New Zealand. A very traumatic crash here where he hit the infield dirt wall. And so many of these things have been changed now. So these things wouldn't happen like this anymore anyway. But his roll cage broke. And unfortunately, through this, he was thrown out of the car through the windshield and lost his life. 35-year-old driver. And then again in Atlanta, Chad Coleman. This was in August 1998. This was his fourth race out there. So this puts some credence to inexperienced drivers going at speeds like this. But this was his fourth race. On the very first lap, he slammed into the wall. And unfortunately for him, 30-year-old driver, they were unable to revive him and unfortunately lost his life with that. But the interesting thing that I didn't hear, or at least I haven't watched the episode, so I don't know, but I didn't hear him talk about the other racetrack, the Super Speedway, where I really think about the ARCA series. And this was Talladega. This is Talladega. And there's been more incidents that have happened there. And we can go back to 1983. This is Ken Kalla. And he hit an inside guardrail. Again, things that have changed so much. He had severe skull injuries, unfortunately passed away with that situation. And then Tracy Reed, July 25th, 1987, and suffered massive head and chest trauma. And what's interesting about this was he worked for Cale Yarborough. And another interesting point of him was a lot of people compared him to Davey Allison, almost like a look-alike to Davey. So a tragic situation there for him. And this one right here, Chris Gerke at Talladega. This was a very, very violent hit. And this was in 1991. And just unfortunate situations. I also should add in Gene Richards. He lost his life in 1982 at Talladega. So again, we have one in 82, one in 83. But again, so many of these aspects have changed over the years. I have to have the argument of where are these guys going to learn on the racetrack if they don't have this ability to run in the ARCA series on so many speedways. We used to have the NASCAR Sportsman Series. Unfortunately, that was a very tragic series. I loved that series. Not many of them races I wasn't at in person, but it was a very tragic situation, and I understand why it ended. But the ARCA series, we got to look at it again. How are people going to come up through and get speedway experience to get out there and run in the truck, the Xfinity, and the Cup Series if we don't have something like this in place for these guys to run? So that would be my argument with this. And I have a lot of ARCA series means something to me. I first got into ARCA series working with Bill Venerini back in 1993. And I'm friends with the family. Again, they brought up so many people through the ranks. I don't know the argument. I don't know the answer with this. And that's why I want to talk to you about it. I want you to obviously put your comments down below. Do you think Denny's right? Do you think this shouldn't be out there at Daytona or on these speedways? They should just be running the short tracks, which incidentally, there's been tragedies. There's been fatalities on the short tracks in the ARCA series. And again, you have to look at NASCAR. I mean, we've had Dale Earnhardt lost his life at Daytona. So I don't know the argument. I do say that there probably needs to be some procedures out there to make sure some people have a little more racing knowledge before they are able to get out there at Daytona. But me personally, I don't want to see it end on these big tracks like this, but I also don't want to see nobody get hurt. So once again, throw your comments down below. Tell me what you think about all of this. And man, as always, hope you're having a great week, and we'll see you at the Checker Flag.